Welcome, friends. Welcome to another edition of Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul. I'm your host, Dr. David, the Cutting Edge Doc. And here on Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul, we do in-depth interviews with individuals that are doing cutting-edge work in the areas of healing, spirituality, and social transformation. And I'm very excited about today's show. My special guest today is Monique Darling, and I've been wanting to get Monique on our show for over 2 years. So I'm glad that I persevered. And Monique, for me, is a person that is blazing new trails, both in her personal life and in her teaching, in the areas of human love, sex, and relationships. And she has had quite a personal journey. And she has touched thousands and thousands of people's lives, and she's just getting started. So I'm very excited to introduce Monique to my tribe. Monique, welcome to Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul.
Hi, David. Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. So for those of you that are familiar with the basic format of our show, this is an in-depth interview, so we usually allow about 15 or 20 minutes at the beginning of the interview for my guests to, in a purposeful way, introduce themselves and tell their story. And this really has two purposes. One is to help create an emotional bond with the viewers and the listeners. And secondly, to create an empowering context for the listening of the viewers and listeners, so that when we do get into the discussion about your current work, there's an empowering context for understanding. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over for a while to Monique for her to introduce herself to all of us. So Monique, take it away.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. It's always fun to go back over and look at the story of what brought me to this point. And for me, I grew up with a very, very repressed religious background in Utah. So it was all Mormon town everywhere. And I was basically told from the time I was very little that this is how life looked in this little tiny box. And I looked nothing like that. And so I grew up believing that there was everything wrong with me. And so I was always trying to look around for clues from everyone around me as to how I should act, how I should talk. And there was there's this deep, deep, deep curiosity inside of me that would never go away, along with this deep sensual sexuality that I was told, again, like sex was just for procreation when you get married, and like all of this stuff that came so naturally to me. Then it was like I was silenced at a very early age, including I had a lot of gifts. Like I would sit in my closet. I remember so many times when I was 4 and 5 and 6 years old, and would sit across from a figure that I identified as Jesus. And we just sit and talk and have these conversations. And I could see things and hear things that the people around me weren't seeing or hearing. And if I talked to my mom or people about it, then they'd throw me in the psychiatric hospital and they'd say, "You don't want to be crazy, do you?" And so again, I just really shut down being able to speak about that, and just really felt like, wow, what is wrong with me? And I learned when I was in high school that I finally understood that what I was feeling, because I felt so much all of the time, is that I was feeling other people's emotions, and that I had a really high sense of what was going on with people around me. And I could often tune into their spirit guides. Like I was getting all of this myriad of information, but I was so afraid of speaking out that I would find other ways to be able to help them. I'm like, "Hey, did you see this magazine article?" And like I worked in the health food industry for 13 years. So when people would come in, I just naturally, like I would be scanning their body and find where was stuck and what was happening. But then I'd lead them over to a shelf and say, "Hey, have you tried this? And would you like to try this?" And would like had some background and at least something that sounded normal. So I was able to start doing my soul purpose. And then 12 years ago, then I found Cuddle Party. And I had a friend send me a link. And they said, "Monique, is it this freaky?" And there were 6 minutes of people using their voice and touching in like flannel pajamas in a non-sexual way. And it called to my heart more than anything ever had. And so I went and got on the website and found out that that there was a cuddle party only 2 hours away, just a couple of days later from my house in Las Vegas, because I lived in the southern part of Utah at that time. And so I told my husband, and he's like, well, I'm going to bring you and my 3 boys. We're not going to go to that cuddle party, but we'll drop you off and come pick you up and make sure that no weirdos get you. So they were supportive of me in that way. And I went shopping and got some pink flannel pajamas and went and showed up. And I remember my hands were shaking and I was nervous and afraid. And I was also so excited because there was that piece of me that was curious and hopeful that had never gotten burned out. With everything else that had been silenced, that piece couldn't. And so then Reed Mihalko, that was the creator of Cuddle Parties, opens the door and he's like, would you like a hug? And instantly my body relaxed. And I really didn't realize until 6 or 7 months later that the reason for that was because that was the first time in my whole life I'd ever been asked before I was touched. And so, along with having my voice silenced, I'd had a lot of physical and emotional and sexual abuse growing up. So this was like an enormous first step in having someone honor my voice. And when I sat in that first Welcome Circle of Cuddle Party, which is really just a boundaries and communication workshop, once again, I started looking around and seeing that people had the option to be able to say no. And that not only was it a beautiful thing, it was a gift. And that the more that you could start trusting your no, that's when you could start finding yes in the world. So I went to as many cuddle parties as I could that next year. And then Reed said, why don't you become a cuddle party facilitator, Monique? And so I started doing the training. And at the same time, he had introduced me to this beautiful Tantra community down in San Diego. And so it was about an 8-hour drive because I was not flying on airplanes at that time in my life. And so once a month, I get in my car and I drive to San Diego and stay with friends and start expanding and exploring this journey of being able to reclaim my voice and my body with Tantra, with cuddle parties. And then when I became a cuddle party facilitator, then when I go out to San Diego, then I do 3 or 4 cuddle parties while I was there. And whether there was 1 person or 30 people, I was just so excited to be able to share that, you know, who you are and what you have to share with the world is exactly perfect as you are. And eventually, then my family moved out with me. My husband and my 3 boys moved out to San Diego. I started doing regular events there. And then I started being invited around the world. And so I did some deep work with some counselors to be able to not be afraid of airplanes. and now, like the last 6 years, then I've just lived on the road. And I've done over 2,000 workshops everywhere you can imagine. Like I was in Ireland 2 years ago and did Ireland's first cuddle party. And it was part of the Bliss Festival. And so there were picketers outside. And for whatever reason, they got mine and the co-facilitator's name. And so we still have the newspaper to this day that says, Monique Darling and Adam Paulman bring debauchery to Ireland. It just made me laugh. And most recently, then I was invited over to China. And a woman came to my event in San Diego, and she said, wow, like my dad organizes this underground Tantra group in China, and we'd love to have you. Like the women need to hear what you have to offer. And so within 4 weeks, then we made it happen. I got a special visa. I just went, even with the risks and everything involved, like my heart was a yes. And getting to sit there in the room with these women that have also been repressed and shut down and not wanted and not feeling like they were good enough and had their voice closed off. And it just felt like, wow, this is what I've been in training for my whole life. So I feel really, really blessed. I went from that life of feeling like everything was wrong with me to being able to celebrate all of these aspects of myself and help others celebrate too. So that's like the mini journey of from where I was to where I am, David.
Thank you. With your permission, I'd like to take a much deeper dive into a few areas. Mm-hmm. Just put it out there in no particular order and take the ones you want in the order you'd like. I'd love you to talk more about your personal journey of your relationship with your own sexuality. I'd love you to talk about the impact that journey has had on your marriage and how that has transformed over the years. Mm-hmm. And my understanding, we haven't had a conversation about it, but based on your public communications. My understanding is about a couple of years ago, you met your soulmate,
Yes.
or you surrendered to that meeting. And I'd love you to talk about that journey and in and of itself, and also how that has impacted your marriage and your relationship with your children.
Okay. So, because of the sexual and emotional and physical abuse, or whatever reason, like my body was completely closed off around sexuality. And so when I got married, I met my husband when I was 11 and he was 14. And we ended up getting married when I was 21 and he was 24. And I was still curious about sex and I wanted to try all of these things. But my husband had only ever kissed another girl. He was a virgin. Like, he still felt guilty and still felt like sex was just to have children. And so along with his shame and my own physical stuff, then sex actually hurt. Like, any type of penetration really hurt. So we were only having sex a few times a year because I wanted to have children. Like, we both wanted children deeply. And so, but I felt like there was this huge missing link. Like, I felt like there was so much creativity and so much power. I had so much curiosity around sex, but we couldn't find a way to be able to make it work. And so I remember having all of these conversations with him about, look, there's this ranch in Nevada where it's actually legal to go and hire someone and they can show us how it really works. And he would just shut me down. And I mean, he didn't really shame me, but he's just like, we'll never go to heaven if we do that. You'll never get to see Jesus and God. And like, there was so much religious overtures that he's just like, no, we can never do that. And so I loved him very much through the course of many miracles. And we did have 3 boys, and each of them I almost died in childbirth. And so it was a really big deal. And then I ended up getting my tubes tied. So we knew we weren't going to have any more children. And yet there was still that curiosity around sex. And so when I went to Cuddle Party, and then Reed introduced me to the Tantra community, then I found some amazing, amazing healers. First, I went to a male Daka, and a Daka is one that does sexual healing for people. And so he did, Reed had been my coach for 3 years without hands-on and just helping me reclaim my voice. And then this Daka that I found was able to help me reclaim my body. And it was the first time that I felt safe around another man. And it was the first time that I actually started feeling in my body, like it was okay to be in my body. So I started experiencing pleasure. And eventually then I had a woman start doing sacred spot work on me, which is what I actually teach all over the world now, is teaching women how to do hands-on work with each other, because our yonis, our vaginas, vulvas, whatever word you want to use, they're our softest organ. And so any abuse, any trauma that happens in our life gets stored there. And so it was so beautiful to have this woman just hold me with presence, with consciousness, while I'm having this other Daka do this work with me, that eventually then it opened up all of these spaces inside of me so I could touch God during sex. Like, my body was open and available. I eventually had, female ejaculation, and was just had access to all of this pleasure that I had imagined, but I'd never experienced growing up. And so I was bringing home all of these ideas and things to my husband, because he knew he and my boys followed along with my whole journey. I wasn't doing anything behind their back. It was with his support. But he still had his own shame, and he's just like, wow, I'm not feeling that I want sex at all. And so we were always a mismatch that way. And so during the course of exploring with Tantra, and as my body started opening up, then we heard about polyamory, and it's having multiple loves. And so I started diving in really slowly at first. And so for 3 years, then I just had a couple of outside experiences with people that loved my husband, Nate, and he loved them. And so it was a lot easier for him to be able to accept. And we just started tiptoeing in. And he actually did have a couple of other lovers, and Nathan did. And one of them, he experienced this great bliss and no shame for sex. And so he knew he could have that experience. He just wasn't able to have it with me. And so our children are finding us more and more happy. And so they start having more questions. Like when I grew up, like I didn't masturbate till I was 34 years old. Like I was shamed. I was told, do not touch your body. And so it was so beautiful to be able to create a space at our house where anybody could mark off like an hour at a time in the house. My sons, me, my husband, and then everyone else would leave, and you get to have the house to yourself. So whether I was with a lover or my boys were with themselves, or like there was this experience of being able to have a space that was all our own, and that sexuality was being celebrated. And so over the course of the next 8 years, then Nate and I opened up our marriage a lot more. I was blessed to have 8, well, Nate was one of them, so 7 other lovers around the world. One of them was an amazing girlfriend. Like I had my first girlfriend. I realized I was attracted and loved women too. And the common theme was that each of them knew my family. They respected my family. They all had their own lives and their own worlds. And then when we get together, we co-teach, we'd have this amazing sex, we'd have this amazing bond. And then in between, then we'd each have our own lives, and we'd just send each other messages or poems, or like it was a really amazing experience to be able to explore all of these connections at the same time without drama or hurt, or like it was just incredible. And then three and a half years
Could I ask you
ago.
a question?
Sure.
Were you and your husband ever able to connect sexually in a way that was working for you guys, or did you guys just realize that that wasn't part of your connection?
There have been a couple of times in the last 8 years that it just came really naturally, and it felt good, and both of us were able to get past any of like the old baggage. But as on an ongoing basis, he's really not interested in sex very often in his life in general, and so it's just not hasn't been a big deal for him.
It's
And
been fantastic the way that he has loved you and given you space to honor your unique love and your unique path.
yeah, he's an amazing human being. I love him so much. And he's been an incredible dad to our sons. And it's just, my journey would not be possible without all the support and love that he's given me in so many ways.
So I didn't mean to interrupt your train of thought, but that question was burning in me.
Thank you for asking. No, I was just transitioning into Peter. So 3.5 years ago, then I met Peter. He came to one of my events with one of my other lovers, and we were doing an energetic sex event in Oakland. And so Peter shows up, and we just had this instant connection. And we went out on a date that weekend, went to Ecstatic Dance. And I'm like, why don't you come on the road with me and do a couple of events? Because I love to collaborate. And he did. And so it was supposed to be like a 9-day journey. And towards the end of it, I'm like, Peter, I have a crazy scheme. Like I'm going to Hawaii for the first time, and there's an extra spot. Why don't you come with me? And he did. And by the end of that Hawaii trip, then like all of those emotions and things inside of me of that I had just wanted to be independent and be my own primary lover, like I started seeing these visions of a white picket fence and of like having a soulmate. And like I was crying. Like Peter, he was so excited because he'd never been introduced to poly, and he'd never had a threesome, and he's having these experiences, and he's just like, wow, this is the most awesome life could be. And I'm like, wow, like I kind of want to go steady with you. And so I started having this experience of him really opening up, and me, like definitely I was being supported by my husband and my other lovers, and they're like, we love you no matter what, like whether we're having sex or not, like we're still lovers. Like we love you, Monique. So I had so much support around me. And then Peter and I started getting closer and closer, and then he got scared because he had never wanted to get married. Like there was just all the stuff that came up for him. And so he left for Ireland, and he was gone for 5 months. And instead of taking that time and like consoling myself with other lovers or with other people or things in my world or teaching, which I've done in the past, I actually sat for the first time in years for 3 months with myself. I stopped sugar. I was consciously celibate. Like I went into any of the aspects of myself that were sad. Like what were the things? Why was I so in mourning and grieving that Peter left? Because I had so much to be grateful for. So then when he came back, I actually got invited to Ireland. Like, that's the crazy part. He's there, and I got invited to Ireland for the first time to speak at this festival. And he was actually supposed to be in Spain at the, he would be leaving Ireland. And so I'm like, okay, I'll come, but don't announce that I'm coming, because I didn't want him to change his plans. Like, I was really set on just discovering me. And she announced it. And so Peter changed his plans and stayed. So he was there an extra week. And so we had this really nice reunion, and had this amazing time in Ireland. And then I came back home, and he wrote me like 3 days later, and he's like, wow, Monique, I found my soulmate. And so he was with this other woman there for the last like 2 or 3 weeks that he was in Ireland. And it was still really like having this experience of being open to this man in a way I'd never been open to anyone in my life, and still being with myself and with the other people in my world. Like, it expanded my heart in ways I didn't even know could exist. And I was sad and I was scared, but I didn't use it to shut down anything. I wasn't defended. And I actually made a conscious choice to love this woman. And we became really good friends later, because it didn't work out between the two of them, but she and I became amazing friends. So all of those pieces helped my heart open more. And when Peter came back to the States, then I was doing things with other people, and he said, could I do some classes with you? And little by little, over the course of the next 8 months, then our bond really, really strengthened. And last year in October, then we had a divine soulmate commitment ceremony where my husband actually came out, and Nate, and he gave me away to Peter, and we were surrounded by friends and family. And so we still are in an open relationship where we have a few other lovers. We mostly play together, but we've just had this incredible experience of finding one another in this lifetime.
What does it mean to you, that commitment that you made to each other?
What does it mean to me?
Yes. What does that mean to you? That ceremony that you went through, I want to understand more deeply what that commitment is to you.
It's just it's such a deep celebration of our love in this lifetime, of being able to be committed to being defenseless, to showing up in each moment with one another, to, like, instead of, marriage is till death do you part, like, this ceremony is about how can we choose each other every day? How can we honor each other in every day? Like, the blessing of having all of these moments together, and how available can we be to enjoy each of those moments with each other, however we might be in that particular moment.
And how challenging is that to translate that commitment into a physical, plain human life? Like if your husband, Nathan, if he got in a car accident or something like that, does the way you would be in that situation with Nathan, would that be impacted at all by this commitment that you and Peter have, or is it somehow a seamless integration? Or
Well, so far then it's been pretty seamless. Like, before I just barely met Peter, then Nate had appendicitis, and I canceled my trip and went home, and I was with him for certain. But like, in the last 3 months, then I actually brought Peter to Utah. And my parents that had disowned me when I started having this lifestyle and leading cuddle parties and these events, like, they've actually re-welcomed me, and they wanted to meet Peter when they're like, we don't want anything to do with that other life. And so all of this integration is actually happening, and Peter loves my family. Like, we've had the greatest time in Utah with my boys, with Nate. And so there's all of this support that, and I support him in going home and seeing his mom. Like, his mom and his grandma are getting older, and so there's more spaciousness that they're needing from him. So I don't think that it would impact our families, where we just love each other. So if we need to go home and be with someone in our family, then the other person would continue teaching or doing what they're doing until we get back on the road together. Like, we're still Peter and Monique.
It's beautiful. So I'd like to transition now a little bit from your personal story to talking a little more about your present work and your ideas about that.
Okay.
One of the things I'd like you to talk about is the distinction between people being so touch deprived and feeling the importance that you mentioned earlier of being free to say yes and no, and to be able to get back in touch with just being touched and touching and feeling and sensing, and that level of the work, and the level of the work that has to do more with dealing with more intense, what we would normally call sexual energy flows. And I think in our culture, sometimes people confuse those two things. They're really wanting this, but then they're acting like they're wanting that. And there's not a conversation about that distinction and the ways they're similar and the ways they're different. And just to begin to segue into your current work, I'm curious how you, in your teaching, how you approach that.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. Well, for me, then I feel like we all have this broad spectrum of where we like to play. And so the one underlying theme of my work is to offer people a playground or a live laboratory to get to experiment being themselves. Like if you have all of the values, all the conditioning, all the belief systems, everything that people have put on you, if they're taken off of you and you have this playground to get to explore, what does it look like? And then within there, then I have totally white events or G events that are completely non-sexual. I have sensual or events where people can explore their sensuality. And then I have sexual events where you can actually explore your sexuality. So they're very distinct and there's very clear containers so people know what they're signing up for and what they're getting into. With the white events, like Cuddle Party or like my Tantric Puja that's all about adoration, where you actually don't even touch each other at all during that puja. And it's places for you, cuddle parties especially are this boundaries and communication workshop that helps you start taking apart your need for touch and its connection to sexuality. Because sex is off the table, then you can actually start exploring where are your touch needs if there's no agenda behind it. And so it's a really amazing playground to get to practice saying no to everything if you want to get to start recognizing in your body what is a true body yes, what's a true maybe, and what's a true body no. And so you're just giving yourself time and space. If someone makes a request of you, that you get to listen. How does that feel? And start trusting and tuning into your own intuition, and then having the ability to say no if you're a no, and have the ability to say yes without shame if you're a yes. And so and then if you're a maybe, then we always teach people say no. Because if there's any hesitation at all, give yourself more time to figure out if you are a yes or a no, instead of jumping into that activity right away. So it's giving you so much space to be able to start reclaiming those aspects of yourself.
Could you talk a little bit more about your experience with yourself and others of working with the female G-spot, and what your experience has been with female ejaculation, and also what your experience has been with supporting men in exploring prostate massage and the types of orgasms that are available for men with prostatic stimulation?
Well, first of all, before I do any of that type of work, then I really encourage people to reclaim their boundaries, reclaim their voice, and to start finding out what's in the way of pleasure. Because so many women will say, I just want to ejaculate, I just want to experience Amrita. And it's almost never their genitals. It almost has nothing to do with their sexuality. It's always their voice. And so it's like really getting tuned into, where are you holding back? Where are you not surrendering? Where have you closed yourself off? And once they can open up their voice, once they're actually able to feel safe to surrender in their body, then Amrita comes. Like, you can teach all the techniques in the world, but at most, all you're going to do is get a party trick. But if you can actually help this beautiful woman in front of you feel like you're totally present with her, that you're holding space for her, that she has access to all of her voice, all of her emotions, then all of a sudden sex is easy. Like, orgasms are easy. Like, it's just helping them get what's in the way out of the way so that they have access to the birthright of so much pleasure in their body. So I really deal with it not as a problem or technique or something that needs to be fixed, or that you can just like learn all of these things to be able to make it happen. Instead of it's what's in the way and how can we help your full being emerge. And then from that place, it's been so beautiful because you'll watch these women like 5, 10 years fall off of their face. Like I've had women come to me, so many, like I think 20, 25 now, that come to me for their 50th birthday, that they've never had an orgasm in their whole life, or they've never had an orgasm from intercourse, or there's just something that they feel like they've been lacking. And I'm like, okay, you can come to me, but I'm not going to promise that you're going to have an orgasm, but I promise that you'll leave feeling more alive. And all of them ended up having orgasms. But it's because we took that agenda and we took that off the table and just gave them the space to be able to actually feel their body and let go of what was in the way. So for me, it's always what's in the way with women, David, and just helping them have that safe space to be able to reclaim what's underneath, because we're already born with this beautiful sexuality, with this amazing body that's just made for pleasure, and then it just gets covered up with conditioning and society, bullshit. And so you let all of that go, and all of a sudden, then your true essence can arise. And with men, then there's often a lot of shame there, especially in our culture today. Then there's a space that men are afraid, and they hold a lot of shame and I guess sadness. There's just this grief, this overwhelming grief for what's been done to their sisters. And so there's this, it's really hard for men to be able to tap into their desire to like want to penetrate the world and to really claim that sexual energy. That, I mean, it's hard for women too, but for men, then there's that space of, oh no, women have really been hurt. Like there's so much of an outrage and like this voice from women these days that are like, this is what's happened to me and I'm not going to take it anymore. That there's no way that men can hide from like, wow, this is what's been going on for my sisters. So with the men that I've been doing work with, then it's really helping them accept, okay, like as a society in general, this has happened with women, but this is not something that I've done. And so when women are having these strong emotions, if they're having tears during intercourse, if they're like this stuff is coming up, then it actually has nothing to do with me. And the greatest gift I can give is to just be available to be with them, with what's there. And so that's been this amazing work. Like I've even included Peter or Lawrence or a couple of my male beloveds in my women's circles, because when I was just doing the women's circles by themselves, then the women would open, and then they're like, it's us against them. Like I cannot feel safe with a penis holder in the room. And I'm like, okay, well, let's see how we can change that. So it's been so beautiful to be able to incorporate a neutral male, someone that I know has no want or need or hunger for these women, and they're just there to anchor. And then they'll sit in the center and let the women imagine that it's their dad, their lover, their brother, and say anything that they never had an opportunity to say, or have Peter say to them what they've been longing to hear from that man or men in their life. And all of a sudden, all of this stuff starts being wiped away. So it's a beautiful experience of allowing both genders, both men and women. And then, we have trans people, we have the whole spectrum of how people identify that come to our events, and just giving them an opportunity to feel more accepted and more connection with one another wherever they're at. And when you work with prostates, then there's this incredible space of helping men to be able to surrender. And there's this beautiful place of all of us have an energetic penis. We all have an energetic yoni or pussy. And so when you can help men tap into that receptive part of themselves, then there's the most amazing space that they can have beautiful multiple orgasms, just like whole body orgasms. Their actual like ejaculation orgasm can be more intense when you're doing prostate stimulation. But there's, again, a place of surrender. So it's helping them feel safe and that someone's there and present with them, and any reaction that they have, any emotions, anything that's coming up is welcome, and there's room for it on the table. Then there's this beautiful surrender, that there's a pleasure that men can access that most of them have never experienced their whole life.
Thank you. I want to validate something you were saying about the working with women, and it's really about opening the throat and about claiming their voice and their truth. I have definitely noticed that that supporting women in relaxing their throat and their tongue and allowing their exhale to come from deep in the back of their throat and to make noises if that's natural, that a lot of times will open the whole flow,
Mm-hmm.
the whole flow. And I think it has a profound impact on their whole life.
Agreed.
Yeah. So what are you most excited about today in your life in general and in your work in particular?
Mm. Well, my newest class that I've been offering around the world is called Tantra for Empaths or Highly Sensitive Beings. And so I've noticed that a lot of people will come to festivals or they'll come to a 3-day or 5-day workshop and they get blown out, like their circuitry gets overloaded. And so, especially growing up an empath, then I'm like, some people don't even realize that that's what's happening inside of them. Like they don't even know the word empath or what's going on. So it's been this beautiful way to bring people together as like a support group and normalize, oh yeah, there's a lot of us that are super sensitive human beings, and that it's not a curse, it's actually a gift. And here's ways to be able to incorporate it in our life, especially if you're doing tantric practices and opening up your body and your life for even more sensitivity, then here's ways to be able to access it. And so that's been really, really exciting for me. I've had a lot of success and people that leave saying, wow, I never had experienced these, being able to walk into a room being totally open, because they always needed some sort of defenses or like holding themselves back because they were afraid of that short circuiting or being overloaded. So that's been really exciting for me.
How about in your life in general, your personal life? Anything in particular that's really got you lit up these days?
Well, it's really being able to combine my work with my family, because forever then I thought that I was going to have to choose. And I think that that was really important on my journey, because I did have to choose. Then it made me so passionate about my work and about just like falling in love with myself for who I am, because I was never going to get that approval or love from my parents or my community or church or the people that have been around me. And then last year, then my mom found out that she only had a year left to live. And it actually softened and changed so much inside of her. And we'd already had a reconciliation because she missed her grandsons, and like there had been pieces where we'd been reconciling together, but she was still hard. She was still defensive. Like she didn't want to hear anything at all about my life. And in these last 6 months, then she's softer than I've ever seen her. Like she actually stopped smoking. She's lost weight. She's like more healthy. I don't think she's really going to die in 6 months. I think we have more time together. But the time that we've had has been so incredible. Like she's just curious and asking me all these questions. And when I was home, even just last week, then like most of my life, then I'd really long for her just to call and acknowledge the emotional, physical abuse that had happened at her hand with me growing up, and like just longing for that love and approval. And she made that phone call, and I realized I'd made closure on that a long time ago. Like I didn't need it anymore, and I was just able to comfort her and say it, like honestly from my heart. It was just like, wow, Mom, I really understand that you did the best that you could, and I love you, and I thank you so much for this phone call, and I'm so grateful that we have the opportunity to get to know one another from this new place. So, and the same with my dad, like all of these people that I'd longed for approval from my whole life, then now they're just these soft beings that are actually longing for my approval and acceptance and just wanting this love, and are just so apologetic because they weren't available to love me growing up. And so I've been on this path of self-love for so long that like all these pieces that I thought that I needed, now they're coming, and they're just bonus. Like it's just gifts. And all of those voices that were inside of my head that were constantly beating me up, and I'd have to try and reel them in so I wouldn't beat up other people around me. Because when we're constantly criticizing ourselves, we can't help but be in some form of judgment to the other people or things around us. Then like there's this place of contentment that I didn't even know existed. And so again, like I got really sick, and I actually almost died in January from a big wave hitting me in Hawaii. And there was a little 14-year-old boy that reached in and pulled me out and brought me in on his board. And then I got the flu, and I was down for like 3 weeks. I was in and out of the hospital. I couldn't keep any food down. I was so sick, and it actually reset my whole body. And it's like, wow, I actually finally have value for doing nothing. So since then, my whole life has really changed, and I have so much joy in solitude. Like I used to just anticipate and can't wait to go see my lovers or go to this next adventure and go do this next thing. And now the things that I'm anticipating the most are just sitting and doing nothing and lying in the sunshine or listening to music. And so I feel so blessed in my opportunity to get to teach and be with other humans. And there's just this greater, bigger picture of contentment in my place in the world that I don't need to prove or strive or show up in the ways I always had to.
Thank you. One of the things I wanted to bring up, because I know in many people's minds, this is one of their main reasons why they don't pursue their passions, is their concerns about being able to be financially responsible for themselves and their families as they do that. Has that been an issue for you or your family? And if so, how have you dealt with that? And has there been any person or resource that's been particularly helpful to you along that journey?
No, just really me. Like I even when I first started this, like we were able when my family agreed to move to San Diego with us, then we did have a dear human being that said, "Hey, I have an RV, so the five of you can come move out there." And so we stayed in this person's RV for 6 months while my husband and my oldest son were looking for work. And I'm the one that ended up finding work. And so I was doing just regular, I was doing daycare and assistance work at the same time that I was starting to do these workshops and things. And so I always felt this responsibility to be able to send money home and take care of my family. And so luckily then, whether I was doing a regular job and this job, or then when I eventually transitioned to just teaching around the world, then I was able to always send money home. And I've even been able to help my mom and my dad. So it's, I'm not rich, but I have enough money to take care of my family and get to travel and teach. So it was just a huge commitment, and often then I'm working 12 to 16 hours a day.
Beautiful. Beautiful. I don't know if this is in your wheelhouse or not, but one of the things that is becoming more obvious is that there's a lot of physical assaults on human sexuality right now. Testosterone levels in men have dropped precipitously in the last several decades. There are a lot of xenoestrogens in the culture that are mimicking estrogens, and then there seems to be this movement toward unisex. Does your work address those societal type factors at all?
I asked the question in a different way. I'm not sure that I know what you're asking, honey.
So just in terms of physical challenges, due to a lot of factors, the hormonal picture of men and women is really non-optimal for many people these days. And because their hormones are so out of whack, it has an impact on their whole life, but it particularly has an impact on their experience of themselves as a man or a woman, their sexuality. And I'm wondering, as someone who's committed to empowering people in the area of sexuality, whether that aspect of reality is something you've paid attention to, given any thought to, put any energy into, or it's something that isn't on your radar?
And no, we just welcome people wherever they're at. And so I've known there's many people that have different genders, different orientations, different, like they come to us with all different labels and different ways that they identify themselves. And then just being able to have the space open for people to be accepted and welcome wherever they're at. And like even 2 weeks ago when we were in DC, then we had a play party and I had someone call me on the phone. He's like, I just got off work, I'm a nurse, and I brought my whole bag of stuff that I want to change into. And he's like, I've never been able to be this other alter self. And I said, well, you're so welcome, please come. And so he came and got all dressed up and wore women's lingerie and a wig and like lipstick. And he had this amazing experience, and he spent the night at my host's house that night. And the next morning we all went out to breakfast. And before I left, he was just like sobbing in my arms. And he's like, I've never had a space that was available for me to really be myself. And that I felt like that I could be seen as the man that I am and the woman that I am, and have both accepted equally. So like that was just one recent experience that I felt like that there's just this space of being able to welcome people wherever they're at.
Are you training people now to do, well, you know, they can't do what you do because you are you, but are you training people to function in a similar capacity?
I am. This is the 4th year that every November I do a week-long transformational intensive for extraordinary facilitators. And just as a side note, David, like my oldest son came to that 2 years ago, and one of my friends from Toronto came to that facilitator training also, and they met, they fell in love, and they just eloped last weekend in Vegas. So like it's been this amazing journey with my family. But yeah, every November, this year it's going to be on the Big Island. It's November 1st through the 8th. Then we do this week-long intensive of helping people really get in touch with what they want to offer the world, and then shortcutting it. And so we have like 7 to 10 amazing teachers that offer their shortcuts, and we're just really helping people find that fast track of what it is that they want to offer the world.
It's beautiful. So I'd like to move toward wrapping up the conversation. I want to make sure you have a chance to share anything you'd like to share with our viewers and listeners, anything at all. And then also I want to make sure that you very clearly and maybe a couple of times give out your contact information for people that want to explore your work in greater depth.
Okay. Well, the one thing that, if I only have one thing to share with people, then what I like to share is that who you are is enough. It's always been enough. And the places inside of us that we feel like are unlovable or unspeakable or are unacceptable are the places inside of you that are your greatest gifts. And so if you can dare to just start stepping forward and being and allowing those unique parts of you to be shown, then there's people in the world that will love you so much more for them. You know, you might lose family, you might lose friends, but the cost of hiding those parts of yourself is just too much. And there's so much beauty that you'll find people that actually resonate with who you are, and you don't have to walk through the world hiding anymore. So I encourage you, wherever you're at today, if there's anything that's coming up inside of you, first see if you can find a way to love it. Like that's the key, is starting to love it yourself. The pieces, whatever is triggering you outside of you or whatever is coming up inside of you, is just the next part for you to love. And then the more that you can actually start letting your insides be more fully shown on the outside, then the more that you'll start feeling love and support and feeling like there's actually a space in the world for you, because there is, and the world needs you, because every one of you that's listening here, you're so unique. And we don't need a world full of Davids. We don't need a world full of Moniques. We need a world full of people daring to be themselves. And that's my deepest vision and passion in this life, is to help people be able to have that experience. Because for me, the first time I felt that, there was no going back. I had no idea how to be me in the world, but I knew I could never be that other person that pretended ever again. And so the more that we can do that, the more we offer people glimpses and permission to be able to try that with each other.
And your contact information.
So we just started my new website called everydaytantra.com, and we're doing videos every day. So it's just little small everyday practices that you can start living more you each day. And then if you want to find where I'll be in the world, where in the world is MoniqueDarling.com. So Everyday Tantra, or where in the world is MoniqueDarling.com. And we'd love to have you come play.
Well, Monique, thank you for finally allowing this conversation to precipitate into the physical plane. I appreciate
Well, thank you for your patience, David.
perseverance furthers. So thank you, Monique. And ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening or watching another edition of Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul. On Freeing the Body, Freeing the Soul, we do in-depth interviews with individuals that are doing cutting-edge work in the areas of healing, spirituality, and social transformation. I'm your host, Dr. David, the Cutting Edge Doc, and our special guest today has been Monique Darling, and I would say a pioneer and an inspiration in the presence and the possibilities for human loving, sexuality, and relating. So it's been an honor and a privilege, and with that, we'll close with love and peace. Bye for now.
Bye. Thank you.